As a writer and someone who makes his living writing books and articles, like I'm hunched over a laptop computer typing often, entirely too often. And he's like, you need to keep your chin up, your chest out. Finding great ideas is a game of quantity first and then quality second.
Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. Today, I am joined by my guest, John Brubaker, who was introduced to myself in the show from a past guest that we had on the show, Dr. Rob Bell, where we talked about peak performance. And today, we're going to be talking about leadership. We're going to be talking about leadership and mental health and how they tie together, as well as how you can master, as a leader, the art of innovation. And specifically, we're talking about innovation because our guest, John, or Coach Bru, as we'll call him, he's written 18 books, one of those being a recent children's book that we'll be talking about today as well. I have it right here. He was kind enough to send me a copy of Rudy Kangaroo Moves Forward. So we're speaking to a man who has forwarded many initiatives to help when it comes to mental health and when it comes to helping people become better human beings and helping people improve their careers. So when it comes to innovation, Coach Bru knows all about that. And for those who don't know Coach Bru is constantly exploring new ideas while never forgetting what he does best. It's an approach that has propelled him to the top of his profession as an author and a speaker. Among his 17 books, now 18 with the introduction of his children's book, Coach Bru has 2 award-winning books and 1 international bestseller to his credit. In 2016, his book Seeds of Success was adapted to a screenplay for a Hollywood major motion picture, which is wild. Coach Bru's recent projects include a new children's book that I've mentioned and CUCO Radio, which is also known as Chin Up, Chest Out Radio, America's only mental health radio station. So we're going to talk about Chin Up, Chest Out, what that means, why the radio station, his clothing brand, all those fun things. When you take away even just one piece of information that's helpful from this show, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You're the reason the Be Better broadcast has grown to over 300 episodes over the past few years because you are the best part of the Be Better team. So without further ado, let's talk to Coach Bru himself. Coach Bru, it's great to have you all the way from Maine, my friend. Thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. Dr. Rob Bell introduced us. I can see why.
Shout out Dr. Rob Bell, right?
He's a good man. Very fascinating guy. A lot of achievements, just like you. So I'm excited to dive into it. So tell us right out of the bat, you've got the Chin Up, Chest Out Radio. You've got that mantra that you've got on your clothing. Even for those watching the video, you can see a piece of Coach Bru's clothing there. It's very nice logo. I'd be proud to wear that piece of clothing. Like, where does Chin Up, Chest Out, that phrase come from? What's it mean to you?
Yeah, interesting story. Thanks for asking. I think we need to advertise to ourselves that which we want to see more of. Both with ourselves, with our employees, with our teams that we lead. So anyway, I think that it's an incredibly important thing to do with, any kind of positive thought, because where there's a void, negativity will fill it. And, what are you saying to yourself? Well, a couple of years ago, I had a neck injury just from, I like to do I used to like to do deadlifting. That's my favorite exercise. And somehow I managed to just get a herniated disc in my neck, and it wouldn't heal on its own. I couldn't move my right arm. I ended up going to a physical therapist, and he just said, look at your posture, man. You're not, beyond the injury, you're not doing yourself any favors with your posture. And as a writer and someone who makes his living writing books and articles, like I'm hunched over a laptop computer typing often, entirely too often. And he's like, you need to keep your chin up, your chest out. And I'm like, you know what? That isn't just a good idea for my posture and trying to rehab a neck injury. I think that's some pretty good life advice as well. And, right about that time, we had a little thing. I don't even know if we're allowed to use the P word on air anymore. A little thing called a pandemic that hit. The whole world was shut down, and I found myself not traveling and having a lot of free time on my hands. So I just, I started printing some shirts and hats that were logoed up with the logo I had designed. Kuko, chin up, chest out, and it just, for whatever reason, I think a lot of it was everybody was just sitting around on their phones and on their computers in their house shopping. But it took off as an e-commerce brand and got some real traction, which I find very interesting. That you create an apparel brand that is 4 words, literally just 4 words, and that has more immediate appeal than 17 books that have hundreds of words, wisdom, and insight in them.
Yeah,
but it shows you, like, people value something simple, straightforward, and maybe also it's the intellectual dumbing down of our society today. People don't read as much anymore. I'm not sure, but it's a good brand extension because I talk about positive mindset and leadership and leading yourself. So that's really where that was born, the clothing brand.
That's amazing. I love that phrase, chin up, chest out. And the phrase, it speaks so true. I mean, so many things happen, especially physiologically in our body, when we have our chin up and chest out. Like, so many people, including myself at times, are walking throughout our day, shoulders hunched, our jaws locked up. Right.
It's a stress response. Yeah. And we're more stressed out than ever. Right.
Yes. And it's automatic. A lot of us don't even realize that we're experiencing that. And it's just like going to the gym and working out, right? It's muscle memory. The more you do it, the more you remember to do it, the better you become at it and the more automatic it becomes. And if you're reminding yourself of that mantra every single day, when you look in the mirror and you see Kuko, you see that logo, it's like, oh, this is a really good time to pump my chest out and chin up, because even just that slight change in our physiology, that can pump us up for the next part of our day and make us feel completely different. And I remember I was at a leadership conference recently, and it was a public speaking conference. It was 2 days with a group of, I think 13 or 14 leaders, and they were all amazing. And they were just going there to become better communicators and better public speakers. And long story short, one of the gentlemen was, his posture he gave a speech the first day, and then everyone gave a speech the second day to see how much they improved. And the first speech, his posture was meek. He seemed timid. He seemed afraid to give the speech. He was a decent communicator, but his body language was all off. So the only advice I gave him was, hey, man, next time I want you to have your chin up and your chest out. And I want you to deliver exactly what you did, chin up, chest out. Boom. And he's like, okay. And he did that. And literally it was a complete 180 night and day transformation. And his one takeaway from the 2 days, we asked all of them, what was your top takeaway from these 2 days? He said, that advice that you gave, as simple as it was, chin up, chest out, completely transformed my public speaking game. And if it can transform that, imagine every other area of life it can transform as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're just now tapping into all this research on the effect that your body language has, on your verbal message, but also your confidence, your mindset, and how people perceive you. Your body language, to quote the great American philosopher, Dr. Rob Bell, your body language screams, your voice whispers.
Wow.
Yeah. I might have butchered that quote, Rob. So if you're listening, feel free to correct me. Go into the comments on the podcast or whatever, call me out on it. But I think that's his quote. Like, your body language screams and your voice whispers. And it's so true, because people are forming judgments, within, all of our first impressions of someone are made within 7 seconds. I would argue it's even faster.
Yeah.
But you walk in a room, before you open your mouth, people have already made a first impression.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. And what better to wear than clothing? Like, I shouldn't be speaking on that because I'm not wearing any logos today, but why would you wear an Abercrombie logo or an American Eagle logo? That doesn't mean anything, right? When you could be wearing a shirt that actually gives you a mantra that sparks innovation and makes you feel better. Even my license plate is Be Better, right? Because I have Be Better clothing, obviously, but I don't like to wear it every single day. Maybe I should. I just feel cheesy wearing my brand every day. But again, maybe I should. And I wear that, but every time I walk to my car, I see my license plate, and I'm constantly reminded to be better. So it's a great reminder to
I love that. I love that you have that license plate, and I would argue you ought to wear your merch every day. You ought to wear. I love that you have a sign in your studio that's lit up behind you.
Yeah.
reminds me, Kanye West, another great American philosopher, has a life-sized painting. Like, he commissioned an artist to create this life-size painting of him that sits above his living room couch. So when you walk in the foyer of his house, it's above his living room couch. And I forget the name of the journalist that interviewed him, but this journalist went in and interviewed him and thought it was the weirdest thing. So at one point in the interview, he asked him, "Why do you have that? What's this all about?" And initially you would think, "Oh, it's Kanye." That's coming completely from a place of ego. He probably has one of them in every room in his house, right? There it is. And the reason he gave was, he's like, I ought to be my own biggest fan. If I'm not my own biggest fan, I shouldn't expect anyone else to be a fan of mine.
Wow.
So, pretty deep, right? Yes. For a rapper, for Kanye, but it's so true with everything we do. Like, you've got to be the first believer in what you're doing. And if you're not willing to rep your brand, why should anyone else? And I just think that's as crazy as he might be, I think he's crazy like a fox on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great reasons there. And I think that's a really great point. If you can't be your greatest fan, then how can you expect other people to be a fan as well, especially when we're talking on this context of leadership? I love that. Now, you're the first person I've talked to where you've had a book actually become a screenplay, which I'm assuming that's a movie, right? A screenplay.
Yeah, that sounds way sexier than it really is. But yes.
That's amazing. So it was your book, Seeds of Success.
Yes.
So what's the story behind we could talk about the story of all your books, but this one specifically, what's the story behind Seeds of Success, and how was it adapted into a screenplay? How did that all come about?
Great question. So Seeds of Success, the subtitle is A Leader, His Legacy, and the Lessons Learned. And I wrote that book my first book took me probably a year and a half to write. That was the Coach Approach. I wrote Seeds of Success in maybe 2 weeks. In 2013, and it was a book based on my time and what I learned with my coaching mentor. And it's 99. It's like a fable, like a modern business fable type format, story format. So it's really easy to read and read quickly. And it's one of those books you can read in one sitting. 99% completely factually accurate. 1%. A little flavor added, some creative license added for flavor, I guess you could say. But it was about my time with my coaching mentor. I actually started writing it on my way home from his funeral in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was flying home. And what happened was I realized, he was a college lacrosse coach for like 43 years. Probably forgot more about lacrosse than most people would ever learn. Coached and mentored thousands of young men. And what had happened over all that time was, and as a coach, you spend more time at any level, really, probably. You spend more time with other people's kids than you do your own, especially as a college coach. You're with them 20 hours a week at a minimum. And his own children, who are now grown adults, when they were living under his roof, they felt very disconnected from him. He wasn't around a whole lot, and they didn't really understand him and appreciate him for who he was, the way his players and his assistant coaches and staff members did. And so I initially wrote it and I thought to myself, if it doesn't sell a single copy, but I'm able to give it to his widow and their children and his grandchildren, and they develop a better understanding of their father or grandfather, and come to appreciate who he was a little more, and just learn about him and why we all loved him, then it was mission accomplished. And a weird thing happened. That project just sort of took on a life of its own. The book won 3 awards at 3 different book festivals, one of which was his Business Book of the Year at the Hollywood Book Festival. Some of my readers, said this book ought to be a movie. And when I hear that, I take that to heart. I think, if you're not in any business, if you're not listening to your customers, you're not paying attention to your fans and what they say or think, you're kind of out of touch with your own brand. So I got to thinking about that, and having a screenplay written, unless you're a screenwriter, and it's a completely different skill set than an author, is expensive. So I started a crowdfunding campaign for that on Kickstarter. Kind of the early days of Kickstarter, before it was a common thing and people just happily pumped their credit card number into a project that they wanted to support. So I spent a lot of time going on tour to different cities and just holding live events to promote it. And literally most of my time was spent explaining what Kickstarter is.
Wow.
But my readers raised $33,000 in 30 days to have it adapted to a screenplay. I hired a Hollywood screenwriter, Bob Burris, who's become a close friend of mine, to write the screenplay. And it's kind of how like most movies deviate from the book a bit. This one certainly deviates from the book quite a bit. It's a little bit more about my career path and journey as a result of what I learned from my mentor. But yeah, it was an exciting project. We've pitched it to a number of production houses and places in Hollywood, and it just seems like unless it's a Marvel movie or a remake or a sequel of something that was from a generation ago, it's not getting produced by any of the major producers. So this will probably end up being at some point an independent film project. I need to go. I think the Powerball's at like 500 million or something ridiculous. I need to go buy a Powerball ticket, and then maybe I can afford to become a film producer. They say, Brandon, the fastest way to become a millionaire is to be a billionaire who invests in movie projects.
Wow.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. So like, and if you look at, that whole industry is upside down ever since COVID. People just don't go to the theaters as much. But, that always stuck with me like that. All right, you're asking somebody to take a big chance.
Yeah. Well, it could be on a streaming platform, though. That's how we watch most of our movies now. It could be picked up by Netflix, by Hulu, by Peacock, or whoever decides to pick it up. So it doesn't always have to be in a theater. I think that's amazing. And when I look at you and your career, like it just, first of all, I mean, over $30,000 raised in 30 days by your readers is absolutely fantastic. And as a father yourself, as a husband, like the big question I have for you, and I'm going to ask you this, but not yet, is how do you balance all of that and the travel and the fundraising and the authoring and the writing the children's books and Kuko Radio and the clothing and all these things? Like, how do you balance all that? Because if we're talking on the thread of leadership innovation and how to be more innovative as a leader, like you even mentioned when you wrote Seeds of Success, you said, even if I didn't sell any and I was only able to give it to my coach's family and his grandkids and his and so on and so forth, and it would have been worth it for me. But it took on a life of its own. And that phrase, it took on a life of its own, beyond your imagination of what you could have even expected. This book then went on to become a movie and sell many more copies than you could have thought and win awards. Like when you are innovating for the next thing, when you are focusing on the next step, like even when it came to you writing your children's book, Rudy Kangaroo, like what does creating goals look like for you to the point where you actually start to take action on something? Because I'm sure you have a lot of ideas, but you only take action on a certain few. Like, what does that creative process look like for you?
Well, I am, self-disclosure here. I am one of the most ADD people you'll ever meet. Like I was diagnosed ADHD as a kid, struggled with paying attention in high school. So I think I've always had some entrepreneurial ADD, which is why, I don't just do one thing. I would be bored out of my mind if I just, was, quote, just an author. And all I did was write. I need to have my hands in different things. I find it energizing. I also find it stimulates my creative juices. One project can kind of morph into something else. A clothing brand morphed into a radio station as a result of that. And I don't remember the source of this. It might have been one of the guys on Shark Tank, but it was an entrepreneur who was like an angel investor. And he said that for every 10 things he invests in, 9 of them are complete failures, but the 10th one is usually so successful that it more than makes up, in some cases exponentially makes up for those 9 failures or 9 like financial losses. And I don't think you need to be like a Mark Cuban level entrepreneur for that to relate to you. Like, I think that relates to all of us and everything we do. You might be a CEO who rolls out over the course of a few years 10 different initiatives. You might launch 10 different products. One of them is going to hit huge. The other 9, maybe not so much. But, I think that you have to generate a lot of ideas. You have to generate a lot of different concepts in order. It's a game of, I think, finding great ideas is a game of quantity first and then quality second. So the process I use, and I actually created a book. It's called the Idea Journal. But, the process I use is I write down 10 ideas every day. It could be 10 completely different things. It could be 10, very related things, like 10 book titles for my next book or whatever it is. And I do that every day. I really think, there's like you had mentioned earlier, there's a muscle memory quality to leadership and leading yourself. I think there's a muscle memory quality to innovation and idea generation. You've got to flex that idea muscle every day. It's use it or lose it. It's going to atrophy. So I force myself to do that. And then at the end of the week, I have a rating system where I rate the viability of those ideas.
Wow.
And, so 10 times 7 is 70. Hopefully I'm getting 70 ideas. Maybe 1, 2 at best are going to be really viable. Mm-hmm. That you start to implement. And I think that, I just kind of look at things like this as like an experiment. And, so often leaders, and we talk about being better on this broadcast, leaders want to create change. Well, one of the biggest fears people have is the fear of change. So instead of launching an initiative as, quote, change, we're going to change this, launch it as an experiment. People aren't afraid of experiments. Launch it as an experiment and then kind of iterate that experiment. And if you need to, if it's not working, you scrap it. But people don't fear experiments. They fear change. So why are we labeling this, this sweeping action that we think we need to take as change?
So, okay, so you have 70 ideas. You then bring it through a rating system to determine which of these are the most viable ideas.
Yep.
How do you then decide this is going to be the one that I work on next? Because I think it's great that you said, I have ADHD, like I'm always on to this and that, and I'm always moving. And I relate to that. I've never gone and been diagnosed, but I relate to that where my focus is here and then it's there. And it's like squirrel.
Oh, you're an entrepreneur. You've gone down that lane for a reason. You probably have it to some degree. I think we all
exactly. Yeah.
So how do I figure it out? Well, the rating system is basically like, how much will it cost? Is it economically viable? Is there, is there any kind of proof of concept already out there? I don't want to do something somebody else is doing, but at the same time, it would demonstrate that there's a market for it. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player. There were other MP3 players. He just did it different and better. But he knew this is viable because people were already buying MP3 players. So Steve Jobs is kind of brilliant in that regard. So is it, viable? How much financial resources will it take me? And then third is just, how fast do I think I could produce it? And then fourth is really like just rating how passionate I am about it. And if there's something, on a scale of 0, those are all on a scale of 0 to 10. And if there's something that doesn't rate very high in any of those categories, except I'm really passionate about it, I may do that anyway, just in my spare time, on a whim, on a weekends, just because it's a passion project and that gives me energy. And I find that fulfilling. With no expectation of like, this is going to be part of my business model, or no pressure to monetize it, but just something that brings me joy and energy. So, that's how I rate those things. And that's sort of how the apparel brand got put through that filter. The radio station got put through that filter as well.
So let's dig more into this, because I
Sure.
really like that system that you've created, and it's obviously worked very well for you specifically, and I'm sure for other people, because you wrote a book on it. People have read that book, and other people are doing this too. So, okay, so you choose an idea, you bring it through that rating system. Let's say it's the clothing brand or your children's book or one of the many things that came from this system. How do you then see it through to completion without being distracted by, because the next day, I'm assuming you sit down again and you write down 10 more ideas and you continue to rate them at the end of that week. So how do you see an idea through to completion without leaving it and going towards the next shiny object?
So I have two things that I do to prevent that shiny object syndrome, or just prevent, like, because you have ADHD a little bit, you have impulse control issues too.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been known to fire my mouth off without thinking. Like, my mouth moves faster than my brain sometimes. So when I shouldn't, I call them folders, but when I shouldn't respond to something in an email, like you read something, you're pissed off and you want to hit reply right away, and you have an emotional reaction, or emotional reactions and decisions are not good decisions. I do what I put it in the cooler. And I literally have an email folder, and this relates to your question about my ideas. I literally have an email folder called the cooler. And I put it in there for 24 to 48 hours before I even think about hitting send, because it gives me time to cool off and not make an emotional response or an emotional reaction, but a thoughtful response. Well, I also have a folder, air quotes folder, because everything's in the cloud today, of things that I would love to do, but sort of need to be on that back burner of the stove, just kind of simmering. And I'll attach a timeline to it. This would be a great project for 2024, but not right now. Or I'd love to do this, but the timing's not right. I want to wait until some of these other things are brought to life. Or maybe it's something I can delegate to an assistant. And that's kind of how I weigh those options. But, I put them in that separate folder. They're all compartmentalized with the intention of, like, I need to be patient with these and figure out a timeline, and just what makes sense from there. Is that helpful?
It is. It's fascinating because it's rare to find someone who generates all these ideas, moves from thing to thing, completes their projects, and who is organized with it at the same time. Although I'm sure that that's something that came with time after trial and error and trying many different ways of doing what you just mentioned.
Yeah, I have a wife and 2 kids, and if I'm not and I'm a solopreneur. So if, like, I'm not organized in all areas of my life, the time demands are so much, like, I'd really be screwed. And so what I love about your podcast is your focus. And you always say, I've listened to a bunch of episodes, you always say, if you just get one idea or one thing from this podcast, it'll help you be better. Well, maybe my one thing might be people creating an email folder called the cooler. Because how many times do people see something the boss or employee or somebody sent, and they read it and they're just immediately pissed, and they have a reaction, and they just start, like, angry typing and hit send, and they shouldn't have hit send. So maybe, just maybe, you ought to put it in the cooler for 24 hours, sleep on it, reread it, and decide, should I or should I not send it? Should I or should I not revise it before I send it? Like, what are the real ramifications here?
Yeah. I've gotten better at that over time, just knowing myself better and knowing that it's always an emotional reaction when you're going to reply immediately. It's still in that state of however you're feeling, and then you want to send it. You feel vindicated in sending it, but it's smart to put it in that folder and wait. My wife is the cooler for me. Like, I'll say, I want to send this, I want to say this, and she's like, wait till tomorrow and see if you really want to send this. I think it was Abraham Lincoln who wrote that letter to, because Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer and he was attacked by the town that he lived in. And he wrote this nasty letter to this guy that wrote this article that trashed him. And his wife went to the mailbox, or however they sent mail back then, and she took the letter out so that it never sent. And it's very good that it didn't. So his wife was the cooler for him, it seems, as well.
Our wives are the voice of reason in our lives, aren't they? So I get a question for you. How you just had your first child?
Yeah.
And how old's your child?
He just turned 2 months, 2 days ago.
Having a child is teaches you patience like nothing else. And I've always, and like it teaches you to be more nurturing and loving in all areas of your life, as well as being patient. And I've always said, especially when it comes to like coaches, a coach having a child is the equivalent of giving a death row inmate a puppy. It just changes them. It just makes them loving and nurturing and impatient, very patient in ways they never would have expected. So yeah, like I think having a kid is one of the hidden blessings is we all become more patient. And wait till I have 2 teenage daughters, so like we ought to have a moment of silence and everybody pray for me. But like wait till your kids are teenagers if you really want to learn about patience, man.
Wow. That time will be here. And you're absolutely right. Like I've learned more about myself in these last few months than I have my entire life. And it's forced me to really slow down and ask myself what's most important, right? It's also helped me to have more grace when it comes to myself, because our first conversation was rescheduled because events happened that night. It's like, I can't go on air right now.
You were so apologetic. I'm like, dude, I totally get it. I have 2 kids. I know exactly what you're about to be going through.
Yeah, and then you sent me your book too, so it goes to show like have grace for other people, and you did that masterfully. And now we've read Rudy Kangaroo to him like 10 times because I like reading it. It makes me feel good to read it because the principles are the best. I think the principles in a lot of great children's books are even more powerful than some of the great timeless adult classics that are out there. So I'd like to ask you, now that we're on this topic.
Well, that's kind of the funny thing, Brandon, is like that book is as much for the parent or the adult reading it to the kid as it is for the kid, really. Like we can all stand to hear that same message.
Absolutely. 100%. So how did you come, how did this idea for Rudy Kangaroo Moves Forward happen? And for those who are watching the video version, this is the cover, and it doesn't do it nearly enough justice. I mean, the artwork in this book is fantastic. Like it looks like, a great artist of decades of experience wrote this book and the illustrations. So how did this book come to be?
So towards the tail end of COVID, are we allowed to say that word, or are we going to be
That's
censored?
fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Towards the tail end of that thing, obviously, like, some of the people that were hit the hardest are people who can't work remotely, professional speakers, touring musicians. And that's the boat I was in. I'm a professional speaker, and I use that opportunity to go out and promote my books and sell at the back of the room. And so like I'm sitting at home twiddling my thumbs. I had already written, 2 books during COVID. And, I'm just thinking like, what am I going to do? And I was talking to a friend of mine, Rhonda Yocklin, who's a teacher in South Texas. And she said, "Do you ever think about writing a children's book?" I'm like, no, that's like, I need to stay in my lane. That's not really what I do. You've read my stuff. Like, that's not me. And she's like, "Well, you write about mindset, right?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You write about positive attitude, right?" I said, "Yeah." And mental health, you're, a real champion for mental health awareness. And you have this clothing brand that promotes mental health. I'm like, "Yeah." She said, "Well, I can tell you firsthand, being in a school district as a teacher, school district is 80% of the students and their families live below poverty level. Mental health, and mindset are huge challenges for them with distance learning. Oftentimes, being in school is where they're safest. It's where they're actually fed. It's an environment where, there's no, like they're safe, they're fed, they have no negativity, and they're struggling at home and trying to learn at home virtually, and it's really taking a toll on their mental health. I can tell you that firsthand. Um, they need to learn about resilience, and I think the best way to teach anything to a kid is through story-based learning, story-based books specifically. So why not write a book about resilience and the importance of mindset for kids? So, I could try that. And she said, well, why not? Writing's writing. It's just, you're a writer. Writers write. And I
Mhm.
said, well, it's not really my thing. I'm not a children's author. And she said, John, do you know what the average reading level is in the United States? I didn't know. And she said, sixth grade. You've been a children's author your entire career. 17 other books just don't show up in the children's section of Barnes and Noble, and she had a point. I said, well, okay, I get that, but I wouldn't know where to start to find an illustrator. She's like, I already found your illustrator. She's willing to do the illustration. Her name's Piper Colston. She's an 8th grader at my school. I was her 5th grade teacher. She's an amazing artist. So she puts me in touch with this girl because now I've run out of objections. I need to stay in my lane. No, you don't. Writing's writing.
Yeah.
The average reading level. You've been writing for kids all along. I can't find an illustrator. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Like, I don't think the Earth's flat, but I am a conspiracy theorist when I think she had this whole thing planned before she suggested it to me.
Nice.
So she introduces me to this 8th grader, and I asked her to do a mock-up of the cover. I offered to pay her, and she did what I thought, as I described it, what I thought I wanted. And I sent her a copy of the manuscript after I wrote it. And this is over a period of a couple months. So she read the manuscript, did the cover in that order, and then said, to be honest with you, John, I don't think the cover, as you describe it, does the story justice. Can I render you an alternate cover? And like, this child
Mm-hmm.
is pushing back on me and thinks she knows what I ought to do, a 52-year-old who's written 17 other books, better than me. So at first I'm like, the nerve of this kid. And then I'm thinking, she did an amazing job on the cover as I requested it and described it. Then I'm thinking, if you're this, and all we ever did until this point was text message, and then we talked on phone once. If you're an 8th grade kid and you're willing to push back on an adult who's worked in that industry for years, you must be pretty confident in your skills.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm thinking, like, complete perspective shift for me. I'm thinking, I'd be crazy not to let her do that. So I let her provide me an alternate rendering, as she so eloquently said, and it blew away what I had envisioned. So I just told her, I'm like, listen, Piper, that's freaking amazing. I want you to take all the notes I gave you about what images and, scenery I think ought to go on every page in the interior, rip it up, throw it away, do whatever you want. You don't have to run it past me. When you tell me it's done, it's done. I'm not going to ask for any changes. That's amazing. And it was a big lesson for me. And I think that the leadership lesson and, how leaders can be better is one of the toughest things for leaders to do is let go and trust and, delegate to your weaknesses. People who have complementary strengths. Like, I would have been insane to try and impose my will on that project as opposed to letting her run with it. It came out way better than I ever envisioned it. But, you have to be willing to let go. There has to be, you have to check your ego at the door with situations like that. And I am really glad. She was thanking me. She's like, I've learned so much. from doing this project. This is something that's going to go on her college applications or portfolio or resume for the rest of her life. And I'm thinking, I should be thanking you. I probably learned way more than you did through this whole project. And it also teaches you like be a lifelong learner. I'm 50, at the time I was 52. I'm 53 now, and I learned from an 8th grader, a teenage kid, not even high school. I learned a lot.
Because you opened yourself up to learn at the same time by lowering that ego. Like you said, not saying, oh, I've authored 17 books. I know what I want on this page. I meet a lot of people like that, some of which have been on the show and they're great people, but that ego is there. But you were able to lower that. Was that a conscious decision of, I'm going to let her take the reins and do her thing? Like, have you had to learn how to dispel your ego to let opportunities in?
Yeah, and I think what has helped is working with other designers on my other books. Like, I had an idea what I thought I wanted, and then they're really the experts. And I may have pushed back a little, had some back and forth on some changes that I wanted with the professional designers I use for other books. But at the end of the day, they had the right concept. They knew way more about doing their job than I do. So I just treated her like any other professional, and maybe gave her, loosen the reins and just let her run with it even more. Because I never had any expectations for the book. I didn't think it'd be my most popular book. I looked at it as much her project as it is mine. And if it gives her an opportunity to build her resume and make a name for herself locally, whatever the case, great. But yeah, it was absolutely a learning experience for me. And I think the other stuff that I did prepared me for that, to be willing to let go a little more, because that's certainly a process for all of us.
Absolutely.
So now here's the cool part of the story and how this concept for the book and the title and why the character is a kangaroo. This goes back 20 years, Brandon. You talk about like putting an idea on ice in the cooler folder, so to speak. I've had this idea sitting on ice, so to speak, for the right time for 20 years. So it was 2002. I was coaching at St. Andrews University, and we were playing Virginia Military Institute. The coach there is a friend of mine. And so we head over there, and I'm just chatting him up before the game, as coaches do, like at midfield or midcourt. You're just, talking to your opposing head coach. And I just said to him, I'm like, hey, Doug, what's the deal with the kangaroo logo inside your helmets and your uniforms? Now, Virginia Military Institute, their mascot, they're called the Keydets, not the cadets, but Keydets, which I think is just, Southern drawl for cadet, maybe. And he's like, great question. Glad you asked. He said, did you know the kangaroo is the only mammal on the planet that cannot move backwards? And that's the mindset we take as citizen soldiers at the Virginia Military Institute. We never move backwards, or only moving forward. Wow. I'm like, for real? He said, yeah, you didn't know that about kangaroos? I said, nope.
I didn't know that.
That's our mindset. We don't look back. We don't move backwards. We can only move forward. And that always stuck with me. Like, it is, number one, so unique. There is one animal in the entire animal kingdom that was built that way. And then two, that came in handy at halftime because we were blowing them out. We had a big lead. And I just told the guys in the locker room at halftime, I'm like, because they're all like celebrating. It was real relaxed. They're joking around. They're thinking this thing's over. And they're just going to keep steamrolling them in the second half. I said, I don't think you guys know who you're playing here. They're a Division I team. We're a Division II team. So that was already an upset. I said, do you have any idea why the kangaroo is their mascot? And I'm acting like I've known this forever. Like, you guys have any idea why the kangaroo is their mascot? And they're like, no, why? I'm like, well, did you know it's the only animal that can't move backwards? Like, he queued up for me my halftime speech and didn't even know it. And they're like, huh? I'm like, yeah, that's their mindset. Score 0-0. I guarantee you they're going to come storming back. As far as they're concerned, there is no scoreboard. They're not behind. They're just going to keep moving forward, going hard. That's what kangaroos do.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they came roaring back. It was a 1-goal game. I think we might have squeaked out a goal in the last minute to make it a 2-goal game. We won, but it was a struggle. And the game was always in question right up until the very end. And that might have been part of why that's just sort of been embedded in my memory for the last 20 years. And then as I'm thinking, what on earth would I write a children's book about? When my friend Rhonda thankfully kind of forced my hand into writing it, I'm like, oh, I know. The central character will be a kangaroo. And he'll have a series of challenges that he has to overcome and try and get past and not dwell in, a negative outcome that happened the day before, and just learn how to be more resilient, have a positive attitude, and not compare himself to his classmates.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that not just kids wrestle with, but adults, is that comparison game. I forget who the philosopher was who said comparison is the thief of joy. Mm-hmm. It might have been Gandhi. It might have been The Rock. I'm not sure which one, but comparison is the thief of joy. And, we compare, what we see somebody's perfect filtered Instagram posts, of their allegedly perfect life. We compare that to, our failures and our flaws. Essentially we're comparing their ESPN highlight reel to our blooper reel.
Yeah.
And it doesn't serve us well, So I thought that needed to be a big takeaway message for kids and for the adult reading it to them.
Amazing. What an awesome story.
And frankly, it's all stuff I need to hear myself. I think that we write for ourselves. You probably do this podcast for yourself to a certain extent. It's what we need. And, again, advertising to ourselves that which we want to see more of to kind of bring it back full circle there.
Absolutely. I want to look up this. By the way, that quote, comparison is the thief of joy, that apparently, someone might have said it before him, but that apparently came from Theodore Roosevelt, the past president of the United States. Yeah, so then there was more context to it there as well. But it's what you just mentioned.
He took that from The Rock. I think The Rock.
Probably. Yeah, he probably knew The Rock was coming, right? He knew what The Rock was cooking. So the idea you just mentioned, I love the idea that we do these different things and work on these projects for ourselves more than we do it even for other people. And you might have heard of this book. Have you heard of the book called The War of Art?
Pressfield, yes.
Yep, by Pressfield. And it's a fascinating book. It's a powerful book.
And people who do what we do, that's required reading, man.
Yeah. He talks about the idea of resistance and moving through resistance by just putting in the work every single day, right? Even if you don't have high expectations for what you're doing, which is something I want to ask you too. I have a couple of rapid fire questions here. I have a ton of questions. We can always do a part 2, but something I love, and this is the final thing I'll say about Rudy the Kangaroo, is with the art on the cover, you might have intentionally done this or Piper might have intentionally done this, but if you look, for those who are just listening, it shows a picture of Rudy the Kangaroo moving forward, and then in the dust is like an homage or a picture of his past self in the dust. And the picture of himself in the dust, his chin is down, his chest is down, right? And the picture of him moving forward, his chin is up and his chest is out. So it's a cool homage to your other works inside of your children's book. Just real quick, was that intentional or
it was on her behalf? Funny story. I was doing a author visit in elementary school. And part of what we do is I make an interactive with the kids and I ask them, what do you see in this scene? What do you see in that picture? Well, I ask them, what do you see on the cover that's significant now that we've read the book? We go back and look at the cover and you get to see how he's changed throughout the book. And I'm like, what's that cloud of dust? And one kid raises his hand real quick. So I'm thinking, all right, I got to call on this kid, but he definitely knows the answer. He got it right away. He raised his hand first. So he's like, I said, yes, what's your name? Let's just say his name's Steven. He's like, oh, it's Steven. Steven, what do you see? He's like, that's Rudy farting. And I'm like, Not exactly.
That's
No, like,
amazing.
I mean, that taught me maybe don't, maybe
Yeah.
the best clown is the kid that fires his hand up real quick.
It just speaks to the imagination
But
of kids, right? And if we
yeah,
held on to that imagination.
there is a lot of symbolism in that book. And here's my challenge for you. This is your homework, Brandon.
Okay.
There is an animal. There are a couple of Easter eggs hidden in the illustrations. There's an animal that is indigenous well, not indigenous. It was shipped over from Africa and is now, I guess, sort of indigenous to South Texas.
Okay.
Well, a nilgai.
I've never even heard of it.
There are I think two or three nilgai hidden, one on a page, and three different spots in that book. See if you can spot them.
I'll look for them. That's
Yeah,
cool. I'll read it to you later.
So Piper is from Rivera, Texas, which is very South Texas on the coastal Bend region, and there are a lot of nilgai in that area. So as sort of a, again, even more symbolism, as sort of an homage or a salute to her roots and where she's grown up in South Texas, she decided to sprinkle a couple of them in there. And again, this is an 8th grader, like the maturity and intellect to do that. It's just pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. So let me ask you a couple of rapid fire questions. So for these rapid fire, let's work to keep the answer under 1 minute. Just something quick that people
You put me
can
on a pitch count. Okay.
Yep. So it's something quick that people can take and use. And the first one is, how do you move forward even during times where things are going on in your life? Something happens maybe with your family. You're wondering whether something is worth it. Like, how do you move forward in the face of adversity?
I try and remind myself everything's temporary. One of my buddies is a retired Navy SEAL, and he told me the best thing he got from SEAL training was like, everything you're experiencing, someone else has already successfully gone through. So there's very much like, if they can do it, you can do it too. Kind of aha moment there. So I try and remember that. Like, somebody else has experienced the same adversity and they've come out of the other side better for it.
That's a great mantra. Another mantra that I see in your background, and when I look at all of your books, if I was walking through Barnes and Noble, and this is me personally, it's subjective to every different person. If I was walking through Barnes and Noble and saw this book, I'd pick it up, and it's Stadium Status.
Yep.
I love the cover. I love the title. As a leader, what is Stadium Status?
Stadium Status is a place where we all want to go, and that's to have an audience big enough or a customer base big enough to fill a stadium. I believe Rihanna is credited for the concept of, quote, stadium status. I'm sure Kanye stole that from her and took credit for it himself. But it's, the idea that you can sell out a stadium, and there are very few acts who are truly stadium status. But, the big premise behind the book is stadium status is really a mindset. And anything we do like that has to be a mentality before it's a reality.
Love that. I can't wait to read it. And then you also have Beyond Stadium Status too, which we can always do another episode about, because I think that'd be very valuable for people listening. So the final rapid fire question is, you mentioned a few times different examples of you having low expectations to then be pleasantly surprised moving forward. So you mentioned with your clothing brand, or you mentioned with your children's book, even if it went on to help Piper and her resume, to help her move forward, it would have been worth it. You mentioned with the book that you wrote for your late coach, that even if it was only for Seeds of Success, even if it only helped his family, then it would have been worth it. Is there merit and value in having low expectations, or should we have high expectations of the projects that we decide to move forward with?
So I think and this is like self-disclosure here. I think sometimes when I say that, like, I'm guarding against disappointment for myself. And I absolutely think we ought to have high expectations. But don't let it steal your joy or, shatter your self-confidence if you don't quite reach them. So like, I think it's a defense mechanism when I've said that in the past at times. But then there are other times when, like Stadium Status is a great example of that. I really believed in that book, and I was convinced it was going to become an international bestseller. Come hell or high water, I was going to do whatever it took to make it that. But, as an entrepreneur and as a leader, sometimes self-doubt creeps in with different things that we're doing. And, I poured so much of myself into Seeds of Success. And that children's book was like such uncharted waters for me. That's probably why I was just like, oh, well, if it only helps one person, or if it, helps them understand their father a little better, it'll be okay. So it was kind of me like guarding against disappointment.
There's merit there, though. There
and
is
at the end of the day, they both turned out pretty okay in terms of like, commercial appeal. So, maybe I just need to. There's probably a teachable moment in there for me,
Sure. I mean, you even said earlier, 9 out of 10 projects are going to fail. It's that 1 out of 10 that takes off that you just don't know which one's going to be that 1 out of 10. So it's almost as if you had high expectations for all 10 of those, you're going to be let down 9 times. Yeah. But if you have lower expectations and not even lower expectations, but maybe you allow yourself more grace with the outcome that you can't always control, then you'll be pleasantly surprised when the 1 out of 10 does take off into the stratosphere. Cool. I love it. So Coach Bru, we talked about Chin Up, Chest Out. That's your clothing brand. Where can people find out more about Kuko and all the fun things that you're up to now?
Absolutely. You can go to coachbru.com, for, my personal site with my books and hundreds of articles and all that content like we talked about. Chinupchestout.com is the clothing brand, and there's a link there also to Kuko Radio as well. And that's sort of the entry point into that universe. So I love what you're doing with the podcast. I enjoy, listening to and learning from the other guests. So it's great to be a part of this. 2 things. We're going to have to do this again. You'll need to be a guest on my pod.
Cool.
And, we'll get a care package in the mail to some Kuko swag and some
yes. Amazing. I appreciate you very much. I'd love to be a guest, and I'm just happy to have you on the show. And I truly mean this. You can look back to all my other episodes. I don't say this often, but this was one of my favorite conversations on the show to date. And which was funny because Dr. Rob Bell was another one of those. So it just goes to show that like attracts like. And I'm very glad that we were able to make this happen, my friend. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
We covered a lot today when it comes to the concept of moving forward. We talked about the power of the idea of keeping your chin up and your chest out physiologically, but also metaphorically and moving forward in life. We talked about how to spark innovation as a leader with practical tips when it comes to writing down those 10 ideas each day and then evaluating those ideas at the end of each week. Having the cooler folder, right? Maybe having a cooler in your life as another person, like John and I mentioned, our wives are the cooler, right? They help us to make that better decision and not be too spontaneous and impulsive. But I hope that throughout this conversation with Coach Bru, you took away even just one thing that will be useful for you. First and foremost, be sure to go follow Coach Bru. I'll have his LinkedIn page as well as his other social medias below for you, as well as his website, which is coachbru.com, as well as his merchandise, which you should go grab yourself a shirt or whatever else sparked your fancy on his website, which is chinupchestout.com. Links are in the description to make it easy for you. If you did take away even just one concept or philosophy or idea from this show, all that we ask is you shared this conversation with just one other person who could use it as well. You could be the reason that that person moves forward on that particular day and help them embody their own inner kangaroo, just like Rudy himself. Share the show with one person, and thank you for being the best part of the Be Better team. Thanks so much for watching and tuning in, and until we talk again next time, continue to be better.